To the courtroom. I was just a schizophrenic needing guardians for my $3.6 million inheritance. My stepmother sobbed about my frailty while my half-sister perfected her look of practiced pity. They thought they had won, but when the judge asked who represented me, I smiled and dropped a name that turned my father's face ghost white. They did not know the girl they committed 10 years ago was already dead. My name is Laura Whitcomb, and right now, I am 29 years old, sitting in the sterile, air-conditioned purgatory known as the waiting room of the New York State Supreme Court. The chair beneath me is upholstered in a scratchy, industrial gray fabric that smells faintly of floor wax and stale anxiety, but I barely feel it. My focus is entirely inward, grounded by the silk lining of my vintage Armani suit jacket against my skin. It is a piece of armor I bought at an auction in Milan 3 years ago, tailored so perfectly to my frame that it feels like a second skin. It is charcoal gray, severe, and undeniably expensive. It is the kind of suit that whispers power rather than screaming it, but the people on the other side of the soundproof glass partition cannot see the suit. Not really, to them, and to the narrative they have been spinning for the last decade. I am invisible, or rather, the real me is invisible. The version of me they see is a ghost, a construct of their own desperate imagination. Through the glass, I watch them. It is like watching a silent film directed by a sociopath. The hallway is crowded with press. Flashbulbs pop in a rhythmic, blinding staccato, illuminating the 3 figures who have come here to end my life. Not my biological life, but my legal one. They are the Harringtons, my family. My father, Robert Harrington, stands slightly behind the women, looking somber in a navy suit that I know is bespoke but currently fits him a little too loosely around the neck. He has lost weight. Stress does that to a man whose entire identity is built on a foundation of crumbling mortar. He looks down at the floor, feigning the heavy heart of a grieving father, but I know that look. It is not grief, it is calculation. He is mentally balancing ledgers, moving numbers from one column to another, praying that the sum of my destruction will equal his salvation. Next to him is Victoria, my stepmother. She is the star of this production. She is dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, a prop she likely selected specifically for this morning. She is clinging to Robert's arm, not for support, but to anchor him in the frame, ensuring the photographers get the perfect shot of the united, suffering parents. She is wearing black, of course. Mourning clothes for a daughter who is still alive. It is a subtle psychological trick. She wants the judge, the press, and the public to believe that Laura Whitcomb is already gone, consumed by madness, leaving behind only a shell that needs to be managed. And then there is Chloe, my half-sister. Chloe is 26 now. She is beautiful in the way a poisonous flower is beautiful, vibrant, captivating, and deadly if handled without gloves. She has perfected the art of the tragic heroine. She stands close to her mother, her head bowed, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulders in carefully messy waves that suggest she was too distraught to style it. Though I know she spent 2 hours in front of a mirror this morning, she looks up occasionally, blinking rapidly at the cameras, offering a brave, trembling smile. It is a look of practiced pity. It is the same look she gave me 12 years ago when she accused me of stealing her jewelry, and the same look she gave me when she poisoned my reputation at school. They look like the perfect American family under siege by a tragedy. The tragedy, according to the paperwork filed with the court clerk, is me. They have filed for a permanent conservatorship. The legal argument is dense, but the summary is simple. They claim I am incapacitated. They claim I suffer from severe paranoid schizophrenia, that I am unable to manage my own affairs, that I am a danger to myself, and that I have spent the last 10 years living as a transient, homeless and unmedicated, wandering the streets of America. They claim that for my own safety, control of my person and my estate must be placed in the hands of my loving father, Robert Harrington. I turn away from the glass, smoothing the crease on my trousers. The audacity of it is almost admirable. It is a gamble so massive, so arrogant, that only a Harrington could conceive of it. To understand why they are here, willing to perjure themselves before a Supreme Court judge. You have to understand the money. It always comes back to the money. My grandmother, my mother's mother, was the only person in that cold, echoing world who actually saw me. When she passed away, she bypassed my father entirely. She knew Robert. She knew he was a man who confusing motion with progress. A man who could inherit a kingdom and turn it into a parking lot within a decade. So, she left her estate to me. It is a trust fund currently valued at $3.6 million. But there were conditions. Grandmother was wise, but she was also cautious. She knew I was young. So, the trust was locked. The terms stated that the funds would become fully accessible to me upon my 30th birthday. Or, alternatively, the funds could be released earlier if I could prove to a court that I possessed full civil competency and independence for the last decade. That money has sat in an interest-bearing account, untouched, a golden egg waiting to hatch, and in 3 weeks, I turn 30. That is the deadline that has driven my family to this desperate edge. Harrington Estates, the family real estate development firm, is bleeding. I know this not because they told me, but because I know everything about the real estate market in New York. I know they over-leveraged themselves on a luxury condo project in Brooklyn that has been stalled by zoning issues for 2 years. I know their creditors are circling like sharks in bloody water. I know that my father has mortgaged the Hamptons house twice. They are drowning, and $3.6 million is the only life raft large enough to save them. But they cannot just ask me for it. They drove me away 10 years ago. They think I hate them. Well, they are right about that. So, their only option is to take it. If they can convince the court that I am insane, that I am incompetent, then my father becomes my conservator. He gets control of the trust. He can drain it to pay his debts, all under the guise of managing my care. I close my eyes for a moment, letting the memories wash over me. I do not fight them anymore. I use them. They are fuel. I go back 10 years. I am 19 years old again. I was a student at Cornell University then, studying architecture. I love the structure of things. I love the idea that if you built a foundation strong enough, the building could weather any storm. I was quiet, studious, perhaps a little intense. I did not fit into the mold of the Harrington women. I did not care for galas or charity luncheons where the wine flowed more freely than the donations. I preferred drafting tables and the smell of graphite. To my father, I was a disappointment. To Victoria, I was an obstacle. And to Chloe, I was a target. I remember the summers in the Hamptons. The house was a sprawling, white-shingled mansion that looked like a postcard of the American dream. But inside, it was a battlefield. Victoria was the general, and her weapon was gaslighting. It was subtle at first. Items would go missing from my room, my sketchbook, a favorite pen, a letter from my grandmother, and turn up in the trash or in my father's study. Victoria would sigh and tell my father, "Laura is so forgetful lately. I worry about her mind. She seems so scattered." She would swap my allergy medication for sedatives, leaving me in a fog during family dinners, slurring my words while my father looked on with disgust. "Can't you even sit up straight?" he would snap. "You're embarrassing us." And I would try to defend myself. "I didn't take anything," I would say. "I don't know why I'm so tired." "Stop lying, Laura," Victoria would say, her voice dripping with faux concern. "We just want to help you. Why are you so defensive?" And then there was Chloe. Chloe wanted everything I had, simply because I had it. If I had a new dress, she would spill wine on it, accidentally, if I made a friend. She would flirt with them or spread rumors until they stopped calling, but her greatest resentment was my intellect. She struggled in school. While I excelled without trying, that jealousy festered until it became a physical thing, a rot that consumed her. I remember the isolation. I would sit in my room, listening to the waves crash against the shore, feeling like the walls were closing in. I was the black sheep, the difficult one, the unstable one. They repeated these labels so often that I almost started to believe them myself. That is the power of a family narrative. If everyone you trust tells you the sky is green, eventually, you stop trusting your own eyes. But the breaking point was not a slow erosion, it was an explosion. They needed me out of the way. Not just out of the house, but out of the picture entirely. My grandmother's will had just been read. They knew about the $3.6 million. They knew that if I stayed sane, if I stayed independent, they would never touch a cent of it. So they orchestrated my downfall. I opened my eyes, returning to the stark reality of the courtroom waiting room. The memory of the summer party threatens to rise up the taste of the spiked drink, the confusion, the screaming, but I push it down. That is for later. That is the evidence of their crime, and I will reveal it in due time. Right now, I need to focus on their arrogance. They have come here today with a file full of forged medical records. They have paid off a doctor who never treated me to testify that my condition is degenerative. They have witnesses, former housekeepers who were fired and then rehired with a bonus. Neighbors who only heard what Victoria told them over cocktails. They have built a fortress of lies, but their fatal mistake is in their profiling. They think they are walking into a courtroom to squash a bug. They think the Laura sitting in this room is the same terrified, confused 19-year-old girl they dragged out of that party in handcuffs. They think I have spent the last decade crying in a shelter, or working menial jobs, or perhaps drifting in and out of state institutions. They have absolutely no idea what I have been doing. They do not know that the woman sitting here, checking the time on a Patek Philippe watch that costs more than Chloe's car, is not a victim. They do not know that while they were playing socialite games in the Hamptons, I was rebuilding myself from the ground up. They do not know that I did not just survive. I thrived. They do not know that I traded architecture for data, that I traded blueprints for algorithms. They do not know that I am the majority shareholder of a company that specializes in forensic accounting and property valuation. Most importantly, they do not know that I have been watching them. For 10 years, I have been a ghost in their machine. I have tracked every wire transfer my father made to cover his gambling debts. I have tracked every credit card bill Victoria hid. I have tracked every reckless mistake Chloe made that Daddy paid to cover up. I look at the door to the courtroom. The bailiff is coming out. It is almost time. The irony is delicious. They filed this petition to prove I cannot live alone, that I cannot manage $3.6 million. They are worried I might waste it. If only they knew. $3.6 million is a lot of money to them. To me, it is merely working capital. It is not about the money anymore. It hasn't been about the money for a long time. It is about the principle. It is about the accounting. Life is a ledger. For 10 years. The debit column, the pain, the humiliation. The theft of my youth has been overflowing. Today, I begin the process of balancing the books. The bailiff calls out, "In the matter of the conservatorship of Laura Whitcomb," I stand up, I button my jacket, I smooth the front of my trousers, I pick up my leather briefcase, not a battered backpack, as they might expect, but a slim Italian leather case containing documents that will dismantle their lives. I walk toward the door. Through the glass, I see my father look up. Our eyes meet for a fraction of a second. He frowns, squinting slightly. He does not recognize the suit. He does not recognize the posture. He sees his daughter, but he does not see the predator. He turns back to Victoria and whispers something. She pats his hand reassuringly. They are confident. They have the script. They have the cast. They have the stage. But they forgot one thing. I am the one writing the ending. The acceptance letter to Cornell University arrived on a humid Tuesday in April. It came in a thick, cream-colored envelope that felt heavy with promise. I remember standing by the mailbox at the end of the long gravel driveway, my hands trembling as I tore it open. Full scholarship, architecture. It was not just an admission offer, it was an escape hatch. For the first time in my life, I saw a future that did not involve walking on eggshells in the Harrington household. I saw a timeline where I was defined by my own lines and angles, not by the distorted reflection my family forced me to look at. I made the mistake of showing my joy. I ran into the house, breathless, waving the letter. My father offered a distracted nod from behind his Wall Street Journal, muttering something about how architects do not make real money compared to developers. But it was Chloe's reaction that should have warned me. She was 16 then, sitting on the velvet ottoman in the living room, filing her nails. She did not look at the letter, she looked at me. Her eyes were flat, reptilian, and utterly cold. She did not scream or throw a tantrum, she just smiled, a small, tight expression that did not reach her eyes, and said congratulations. That silence was the sound of a guillotine blade being hoisted into position. The campaign to dismantle me began 48 hours later. It started with the medicine. I have suffered from severe seasonal allergies since I was a child. Every spring, the pollen from the manicured gardens in the Hamptons turned my sinuses into concrete. I relied on a specific prescription antihistamine to function. Victoria, in her role as the doting stepmother, always picked up the refills. She was meticulous about it, organizing the pills in a weekly dispenser on the kitchen counter. I did not know then that she had switched the contents. She had replaced my non-drowsy allergy medication with high-strength sedatives and mood stabilizers she had procured from a crooked dermatologist friend. The effect was gradual, but devastating. Mornings became a battle against gravity. I would wake up feeling as though I were underwater, my limbs heavy, my thoughts moving through molasses. I started sleeping through my alarm. I would drift off at the dinner table, my head nodding forward, only to be snapped awake by my father's sharp tone. "Look at her," Victoria would whisper loudly to Robert, pouring him another glass of wine. "She is barely conscious. Do you think she is on something?" "Robert, I found burnt foil in the bathroom trash yesterday. I was not on anything. I was being poisoned. But when I tried to defend myself, my words came out slurred and thick. I sounded drunk. I sounded guilty. The more I protested, the more agitated I became, fighting the chemical haze in my brain, which only reinforced their narrative that I was unstable. I remember crying in frustration one morning because I could not find the right words to explain a simple concept about a history essay. My father looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust and told me to go sleep it off. While Victoria attacked my mind, Chloe attacked my character. She began to stage injuries. It was a masterclass in victimhood. It started small, a bruise on her upper arm, shaped vaguely like fingerprints. She would wear sleeveless tops to dinner, making sure the marks were visible. When Robert asked what happened, she would flinch, look terrified at me across the table, and then quickly look down at her plate. "Nothing." "Daddy," she would say, her voice trembling, "I just bumped into a door. It was my fault. I should have moved out of the way faster." She never explicitly said I hit her. She did not have to. She let my father's protective instinct fill in the blanks. She let the tension in the room do the work. I would sit there, fighting the fog of the sedatives, staring at her in disbelief. "I did not touch you," I would say, my voice sounding weak even to my own ears. "Chloe, tell him I did not touch you." She would just shrink back into her chair, eyes wide and watery, looking at Robert as if begging him to save her from the monster sitting across the table. Robert would slam his hand on the table. "That is enough, Laura. Stop tormenting your sister." The gaslighting was total. I began to doubt my own reality. I would look at my hands and wonder if I had done it. Had I grabbed her during one of my blackouts? Was I losing time, the drugs? Victoria was feeding me caused short-term memory gaps, and they weaponized those gaps beautifully. I felt like I was going insane because the people closest to me were meticulously constructing a world where I was insane. The climax of this psychological warfare came 2 weeks before I was scheduled to leave for orientation at Cornell. I had spent the entire summer working on a final portfolio piece, a design for a community center that incorporated natural light and sustainable materials. It was the best work I had ever done. I had poured my soul into those blueprints. Drawing late into the night when the house was finally quiet, I planned to submit it to a local youth design competition as a final accolade before university. 3 days before the submission deadline, the blueprints vanished from my desk. I tore my room apart. I checked the trash. I checked the library. Nothing. I was frantic. I asked the housekeeper, who looked at the floor and said she had not seen anything. When I asked Chloe, she just shrugged and adjusted her headphones, ignoring me. Then, the local gazette arrived. On page 4, there was a photo of Chloe, beaming, holding a certificate. She had won an honorable mention in the very competition I had planned to enter, and there, held in her hands, was a reduced copy of my design. She had not even bothered to redraw it. She had simply traced my elevations, put her name in the bottom right corner, and submitted it. The rage that filled me was not the dull, chemically induced anger I had felt all summer. This was cold, sharp clarity. It cut through the sedatives. I marched to her bedroom. The door was unlocked. Chloe was sitting at her vanity table, brushing her hair. The original blueprints, my blueprints, were crumpled in the wastebasket next to her. I reached down and grabbed the papers, smoothing them out. The lines I had drawn were unmistakable. "You stole this," I said, my voice shaking. "You cannot draw a straight line. Chloe, you stole my work." Chloe turned around on her stool. She looked at me with that same flat, reptilian smile she had worn when the acceptance letter arrived. So what she said? "You are going to Cornell. You already have everything. Why can't I have just one thing? Besides, Daddy was so proud of me. He said I finally showed some ability. Do you really want to take that away from him?" "I'm telling him," I said, moving toward the door. "I'm going to show him the original dates on these files." Chloe stood up. Her expression changed instantly. The boredom disappeared, replaced by a frightening intensity. "No, you're not," she said. She snatched the blueprints from my hand. I tried to pull them back, and the sound of paper ripping filled the room. My work, my entire summer, torn apart. But she didn't stop there. As I stood frozen, clutching the damaged half of my drawing, Chloe lifted her hands to her face. She pressed her fingernails into her cheeks and dragged them downward, leaving visible red marks where her skin had broken. Almost immediately, the marks deepened. Then she screamed. It was a blood-curdling shriek, a sound of pure terror that echoed through the entire mansion. "He is killing me. Help, Daddy. Help!" I froze. I could not process what I was seeing. She was clawing at her own arms now, ripping her blouse, hyperventilating on purpose to flush her face red. The door burst open. My father stood there, his chest heaving. He saw the scene through the lens they had been polishing for months. He saw his fragile, younger daughter bleeding, cowering against the vanity. He saw me, the larger, unstable older sister, standing over her, holding a jagged piece of paper that looked, in that moment, like a weapon. He saw the torn room. He saw the violence he had been warned about. Robert did not ask a single question. He did not look at the blueprints. He crossed the room in 2 strides. The slap was so hard my vision went white. It was not a disciplinary smack. It was a blow meant to hurt. I stumbled back, hitting the wall, the taste of copper filling my mouth. I slid down to the floor, clutching my cheek, looking up at him. "Dad," I gasped. "She did it herself." "Liar," Robert roared. His face was a mask of contorted fury. "I have watched you torment her all summer. I have watched you spiral into this madness." He grabbed me by the shoulders and hauled me to my feet, shaking me. "You are just like your mother." He spat. The words hit harder than his hand. "You are a sick, twisted, uncontrollable lunatic." She could not control her mind either. "And it destroyed us. I will not let you destroy Chloe." My mother had died of an overdose after years of battling severe depression. It was the one topic that was strictly forbidden in our house. Robert had never spoken of it, except to bury it, to hear him weaponize her pain, to use her tragedy as an insult to justify his violence against me. Shattered something inside my chest that never healed. He shoved me toward the door. "Go to your room," he ordered. "You're not going anywhere. You're not going to Cornell. You're not stepping outside. You will stay in that room until I decide what to do with you." Then he turned back to Chloe, his voice softening instantly, shifting from a terrifying figure back into a caring father. "Oh, sweetheart, let me see." Did she scratch your eyes? I watched Chloe press her face into his chest, crying loudly, over his shoulder. She looked at me one last time. She didn't smile. She simply stared, empty and triumphant. I was taken to my room, the door locked from the outside. That night, Victoria came in not to comfort me, but to take away my phone and laptop. She cleared my desk of pens, pencils, and paper, saying I might use them in ways that could cause harm. She even removed the power cord from my reading lamp. "We're doing this for your own good, Laura," she said, her voice smooth and controlled. "We can't allow you to have these incidents in public. Cornell is out of the question. Obviously, you need rest." She left, and the lock clicked again. I sat in the dark, my face throbbing, the effects of the sedative still swirling in my blood. I was 18 years old. I had a full scholarship to an Ivy League university. I had a future, and in the span of 20 minutes, it had all been erased. I was a prisoner in my own home, isolated, silenced, and branded as a danger to society. I went to the window, looking out at the manicured grounds of the estate. The moon was reflecting off the pool where I used to swim laps. It looked peaceful. It looked perfect. But from where I stood, behind the glass that did not open, I realized that Harrington Estates was not a home. It was a beautiful, expensive cage, and my family had just thrown away the key. This was the moment the old Laura died, the hopeful architect, the girl who believed in truth and hard work. She did not survive that night in the dark. What was born in the silence of that room was something much colder, something that would eventually learn to eat wolves, but they did not know that yet. They just thought they had solved a problem. They thought they had won. The summer I turned 19 marked the 1-year anniversary of my imprisonment within Harrington Estates. I had spent the previous 12 months living like a ghost in my own home, allowed out only for meals where silence was the mandatory course, or for staged family outings where I was forced to smile until my jaw ached. I had lost my scholarship to Cornell. I had lost my friends. I had lost the vibrant, hopeful girl I used to be. But my family needed to make sure I lost something even more important. They needed to ensure I lost my credibility forever. The stage for my final execution was the annual Harrington Charity Gala. It was the social event of the Hampton season, a night where 300 of New York's elite gathered on our lawn to drink vintage champagne and congratulate themselves on their philanthropy. The theme that year was A Midsummer Night's Dream, which was fitting, because I was about to be plunged into a nightmare. Victoria insisted I attend. "People are talking, Laura," she said, adjusting the straps of the pale blue silk dress she had chosen for me. "They ask where you have been. If you hide in your room, they will think something is wrong. Just go downstairs, hold a glass of sparkling water, and nod. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not embarrass us." I was exhausted before the night even began. My body felt brittle, worn down by a year of gaslighting and the heavy sedatives Victoria still forced me to take at night. But I obeyed. I always obeyed back then. I had learned that resistance only led to tighter locks and harsher words. I walked out onto the terrace. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and expensive perfume. A string quartet was playing Vivaldi near the rose garden. Waiters in white tuxedos moved through the crowd like synchronized swimmers. I felt a wave of nausea. To everyone else, this was a party. To me, it was a display of the power my father wielded, the same power that kept me trapped. I found a quiet corner near the catering tent, trying to make myself invisible. My throat was parched. I signaled a waiter for water. But before he could reach me, Chloe appeared. She looked radiant in a gold-sequined gown that hugged her figure, her hair piled high on her head. She was holding 2 crystal glasses of orange juice. "Here," she said, thrusting one toward me. "Mom said you looked pale. She told me to bring you some sugar." I hesitated. My relationship with Chloe had been non-existent since the incident with the blueprints. We lived in the same house but orbited each other like hostile planets. "I am not thirsty," I said. "Just take it, Laura," she hissed, her smile fixed for the benefit of a nearby senator's wife. "Do not make a scene. Mom is watching." I looked across the lawn. Victoria was indeed watching, her eyes narrowing over the rim of her wine glass. I took the glass from Chloe. "Fine," I whispered. "Cheers," Chloe said. She took a sip of her own juice, turned on her heel, and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I drank the juice in 2 large gulps. It was sweet, cold, and refreshing. I did not taste the bitterness. I did not taste the crystal methamphetamine she had dissolved into the liquid. It was not a recreational dose. It was a massive, dangerous amount, calculated to induce immediate psychosis in someone with zero tolerance. 10 minutes later, the world began to melt. It started with a humming sound in my ears, like a high-tension wire about to snap. Then came the heat. It started in my stomach and exploded outward, a terrifying, chemical fire that scorched my veins. My heart, usually a steady rhythm, began to hammer against my ribs with such violence I thought it would crack the bone. 100 beats per minute, 140, 180. I gasped for air, clutching the edge of a table. The string quartet stopped sounding like music and started sounding like screaming. The faces of the guests, men in tuxedos, women in diamonds, began to distort. Their smiles stretched too wide, exposing too many teeth. Their eyes became hollow pits. "Is she okay?" someone asked. The voice sounded distorted, like a record slowed down to a demonic crawl. "I can't." I tried to speak, but my jaw was clenched so tight I could hear my teeth grinding. Paranoia, cold and sharp, pierced through the heat. "They know." A voice inside my head screamed. "They are all in on it. They are going to kill you right now." I had to run. I had to get away. I pushed off the table, stumbling into the center of the crowd. My coordination was gone. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. The ground seemed to tilt at a 45-degree angle. "Laura." It was my father's voice. I spun around. He looked 10 feet tall, a looming shadow. "Stay away," I shrieked. My voice was raw, unrecognizable. "Don't touch me." The music stopped. The chatter died. 300 pairs of eyes locked onto me. "She is burning," I screamed, clawing at my neck, tearing the delicate silk of my dress. My skin felt like it was covered in insects. "Get them off. Get them off me." I staggered backward. Behind me stood the centerpiece of the gala, a 6-foot tower of champagne flutes, hundreds of glasses stacked in a delicate pyramid, filled with vintage Dom Perignon. I lost my balance. I flailed my arms, trying to find purchase on the air itself. I fell backward. The sound was apocalyptic. The crash of hundreds of crystal glasses shattering on the stone terrace echoed like a gunshot. Shards of glass sliced into my arms and back. Champagne soaked my dress, cold and sticky, looking like blood in the dim light. I lay in the wreckage, gasping, my heart fluttering like a dying bird. I looked up. The guests formed a circle around me, their faces masks of horror and judgment. Then the performance began. Oh my God! Victoria's wail pierced the night. She rushed forward, not to help me, but to fall to her knees beside the mess, wringing her hands. "Laura, not again. Oh, sweet Jesus, not again." She looked up at the crowd, tears streaming down her face. "I am so sorry. Everyone. We tried so hard. We thought she was clean. We thought she was getting better." "Clean," a woman whispered nearby. "Is she on drugs?" "She has relapsed," Victoria sobbed, loud enough for the reporters at the gate to hear. "My poor baby girl is an addict." I tried to shake my head. "No," I rasped. "Juice Chloe gave me," but the words were slurred, lost in the chaotic firing of my neurons. I tried to stand up, but I slipped on the wet glass, cutting my hand. The crowd gasped and recoiled, as if I were a rabid animal. Sirens wailed in the distance. They had been called fast, too fast. My father stepped into the circle. He did not look at my bleeding arms. He looked at the shattered champagne tower. He looked at the horrified guests. He looked at the ruin of his perfect evening. "Get the medical team," he said coldly to his security chief. "Get her out of here, now." Paramedics rushed in. They were not gentle. They saw a rich girl high on drugs, violent and thrashing. They pinned my arms to my sides. I screamed as the restraints tightened, cutting into my skin. They lifted me onto the gurney as they wheeled me past the stunned crowd, through the sea of judgmental stares. I saw her. Chloe was standing behind my father, partially hidden by his shoulder. She was not crying. She was not shocked. She was watching me with absolute focus. As our eyes met, the corner of her mouth lifted just a fraction of an inch. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated triumph. She raised her glass of sparkling water in a mock toast, a silent message. Checkmate. The ambulance ride was a blur of red lights and the metallic taste of fear. My heart rate refused to slow down. I thought I was dying. Part of me wished I would, just to stop the noise in my head, at the private hospital. The nightmare continued. Victoria arrived 10 minutes after the ambulance. She demanded to speak to the head nurse privately. I lay in the emergency bay, shivering, tied to the bed, while they conferred in the hallway. I did not know then that Victoria had brought an envelope with her. It was thick with cash, $50,000. To be exact, it was the price of a lie. The nurse came in with a needle to draw my blood for the toxicology screen. She did not look me in the eye. Her hands shook slightly. She took the sample, labeled it, and walked out. An hour later, the doctor came in. My father and Victoria were standing by the bed. "We have the results," the doctor said gravely. "Positive for methamphetamine, high levels. It is a miracle she did not go into cardiac arrest." "No!" I screamed, pulling against the leather straps. "I have never touched that. It was the juice test, the glass." Chloe gave it to me. "She is hallucinating," Victoria said sadly, stroking my father's arm. "Paranoid delusions are part of the withdrawal." "Oh, Robert, what are we going to do?" My father looked at me. For the first time that night, I saw something in his eyes that terrified me more than the anger. It was indifference. He had detached himself. I was no longer his daughter. I was a liability that had finally become too expensive to insure. "I cannot do this anymore, Victoria," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. He walked over to the side of the bed. He looked down at me, struggling in the restraints, covered in scratches and dried champagne. "I have given you everything, Laura," he said. "Education, a home, opportunities most people would kill for, and you repay me by turning my house into a drug den and humiliating this family in front of the entire state." "Dad, please," I begged, tears mixing with the sweat on my face. "Listen to me. I didn't take anything. They are lying to you." "Enough," he barked. "I am done listening to your lies. I cannot let you destroy the Harrington name for one more second." He turned to the doctor. "Where is the paperwork?" "What paperwork?" I asked, panic rising again. "Serenity Recovery Center," Victoria answered softly. "It is a wonderful place, Laura, up in the mountains, very private. You will be safe there." I went cold. Serenity was not a rehab. Everyone in our circle knew what Serenity was. It was a holding pen for the inconvenient children of the ultra-wealthy. It was a fortress disguised as a wellness retreat, where communication with the outside world was forbidden, and treatment meant heavy medication and isolation. It was a place people went into and never came out of. "You can't send me there," I said. "I am 19. I am an adult." "Not if you are deemed a danger to yourself," my father said, signing the clipboard the doctor held out. The scratch of the pen on the paper sounded like a coffin lid sliding shut. "I am invoking an emergency medical guardianship. It is already done." He dropped the pen on the tray. He did not say goodbye. He did not look back. He took Victoria's hand, and they walked out of the room, leaving me strapped to the gurney. 2 burly orderlies from Serenity were waiting in the hallway. They came in. unhooked the brakes on the bed, and began to wheel me toward the rear exit of the hospital. "Wait!" I screamed to the empty room. "Please, someone help me." But there was no one. The doors swung open, and the humid night air hit my face. A black van with tinted windows was waiting, its engine idling like a growling beast. As they loaded me into the back, the realization settled over me heavier than the sedatives they were preparing to inject. This was not a punishment. This was an erasure. Laura Harrington was not just going to rehab, she was being deleted. The doors slammed shut, plunging me into darkness. As the van pulled away, taking me far from the ocean, far from the money, and far from the truth, I stopped screaming. I lay there in the dark, listening to the tires hum against the asphalt, and I made a promise to the universe. They thought they were burying me. They forgot that I was a seed, and one day, I would grow into a forest of thorns that would tear their world apart. Serenity Recovery Center was a misnomer. There was no serenity there, and certainly no recovery. It was a holding pen designed by architects who understood that the most effective prisons are the ones that look like spas. The walls were painted a suffocatingly neutral shade of beige. The air was pumped full of lavender scent to mask the smell of industrial cleaner, and the windows were made of reinforced plexiglass that could withstand a sledgehammer. For the first month, I ceased to exist as a person. I became patient 409. My days were a blur of chemical restraint. Every morning at 8 o'clock, a nurse with a smile that did not reach her eyes would watch me swallow a cocktail of antipsychotics and sedatives. They made my tongue feel too big for my mouth and wrapped my brain in thick, gray cotton. I walked through the corridors like a deep-sea diver moving against the pressure of the ocean, my movements slow, my thoughts disjointed. Any attempt to ask for a lawyer was met with a compassionate, condescending head tilt. "You are confused again, Laura," they would say. "Your father is handling your legal affairs. You just need to focus on getting better." I was completely cut off. No phone, no internet, no letters. I was an island, sinking slowly into the sea. But the human mind is resilient, especially when it is fueled by hatred. I learned to cheek the pills. It was a dangerous game. I would swallow the vitamins but hide the heavy sedatives under my tongue, spitting them into the toilet the moment I was alone. Slowly, day by day, the fog began to lift. The sharp edges of the world returned. My anger, which had been a dull ache, sharpened into a weapon. I began to observe. I spent my free time in the center's library, a dusty, neglected room that smelled of old paper and damp wood. The other patients, mostly burnt-out trust fund kids or exhausted celebrities drying out, preferred the recreation room with its television and ping-pong tables. The library was my sanctuary. It was also the only place with a direct line of sight to the staff parking lot. I started mapping the facility. I found an old copy of Great Expectations and used the inside of the dust jacket to draw diagrams. I tracked the shift changes of the guards. I noted the blind spots in the security cameras. I timed the delivery trucks that brought food and laundry. I was not just reading. I was planning a war. It was there, in the silence of the stacks, that I met Evelyn, to everyone else. Evelyn Vance was just the janitor. She was a woman in her late 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and a back hunched from years of pushing a heavy mop bucket. She moved through the facility like a shadow, eyes downcast, scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans. Most patients treated her like furniture. But I noticed her hands. They were calloused. Yes, but they were not the hands of a lifelong laborer. Her fingers were long and elegant, and when she held a pen to sign the cleaning log, she did it with a flourish that spoke of authority, and her eyes when she thought no one was looking. Her gaze was piercing, intelligent, and terrifyingly sharp. One rainy Tuesday, I was sketching the rotation of the perimeter guards on the flyleaf of the book. I was so engrossed that I did not hear the rubber wheels of the mop bucket stop behind me. "The shift changes at 2 o'clock. Not 2:15, a voice said. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. I slammed the book shut and spun around. Evelyn was standing there, leaning on her mop handle. Her expression was unreadable. "I do not know what you are talking about," I stammered, terrified she would report me to the orderlies. Evelyn chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Do not insult my intelligence, girl. I have been watching you for 3 weeks. You are not taking your meds. You are alert, and you are looking for a hole in the fence." She walked closer, her steps silent on the carpet. She pulled out a chair and sat down opposite me, ignoring the unspoken rule that staff and patients did not fraternize. "Let me see," she commanded, pointing to the book. I hesitated, then slowly opened the cover. Evelyn studied my diagram for a long moment. She traced the lines I had drawn with a rough finger. "You missed the motion sensors on the north wall," she said quietly, "and the delivery gate has a secondary lock that engages after 6 in the evening, but otherwise, it is a decent effort for an amateur." I stared at her. "Who are you?" She looked at me, and for a moment, the mask of the janitor slipped away. Her posture straightened. The weariness vanished from her face, replaced by a steely resolve that commanded the room. "My name is Evelyn Vance," she said, "and in a previous life, before the world decided I was inconvenient, I was a federal judge for the Southern District of New York." My jaw dropped. I knew that name. I had studied her cases in my introductory law electives before I switched to architecture. Judge Vance was a legend. She was known as the Iron Gavel, a jurist who had taken down mob bosses and corrupt senators. Then, 5 years ago, she had vanished amidst a scandal involving bribery, a scandal everyone knew was fabricated, but no one could prove. "What are you doing here?" I whispered. "Hiding," she said simply. "Or perhaps, waiting. The same people who put you in here are the ones who destroyed my career, your father's business partners. The developers needed a friendly judge to approve their zoning permits. When I refused, they found a way to remove me. They planted money in my accounts. They threatened my daughter. So, I took a plea, retired in disgrace, and took a job where no one looks at your face." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I know who you are. Laura Whitcomb. I know about the trust fund. I know about the hearing. I have been waiting for someone like you. Someone like me. Someone who is angry enough to burn it all down," she said. That afternoon marked the beginning of my real education. Cornell had taught me how to build structures. Evelyn Vance taught me how to dismantle them. We met every day in the library, to the cameras. It looked like a lonely patient finding comfort in the company of a kindly old woman, but in reality, it was a masterclass in law and survival. Evelyn listened to my story. The gaslighting, the stolen blueprints, the fake addiction, the hearing. She did not offer pity. Pity is useless. She offered analysis. "You are not crazy," she told me one afternoon, her eyes blazing. "You are just being hunted, and the mistake the prey makes is trying to run. You cannot outrun wolves. Laura, you have to turn around and become something they are afraid to bite." She taught me about the legal framework of conservatorships. She explained the burden of proof, the loopholes in the medical evaluations, and the specific statutes that my father was manipulating. She taught me how to read financial disclosures to find hidden assets. She taught me how to speak like a lawyer, how to suppress my emotions and use logic as a shield. "The law is not about justice," Evelyn would say, tapping the table for emphasis. "The law is a mechanism. It is a machine. If you know which levers to pull, it will work for you. If you do not, it will crush you. Your father thinks he owns the machine. We are going to show him that he is just a cog." But legal knowledge was useless if I remained a prisoner. As the months dragged on, the need for escape became urgent. My 30th birthday was still a decade away, but my spirit was fraying. I could not survive 10 years in this place. "You need to leave," Evelyn said 6 months after I arrived. "You are ready, if you stay. They will eventually realize you are not sedated. They will increase the dose, or they will move you to a facility with higher security. You have to go now." "How?" I asked. "The perimeter is alarmed. The gates are manned. The laundry, Evelyn said. She laid out the plan. It was simple, dangerous, and relied entirely on the one thing the system ignored: the invisibility of the service staff. The laundry truck arrived every Thursday at 4 o'clock in the morning to collect the dirty linens. The driver was a man named Stan, a creature of habit who spent exactly 15 minutes inside the loading dock drinking coffee with the night guard. During those 15 minutes, the back of the truck was left unattended. "I will be on the night shift cleaning the loading dock," Evelyn explained. "I will create a distraction. I will spill a bucket of industrial bleach near the guard station. The fumes will force them to step outside for fresh air. That gives you a 90-second window." "And then what?" I asked, my hands shaking. "I have no money. I have no ID. I am a fugitive." Evelyn reached into the pocket of her uniform and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. Inside was a name and an address in Seattle, and a stack of bills, $2,000 in cash. "This is my emergency fund," she said. "The contact in Seattle is a man who owes me his life. He will give you a new identity. He will help you disappear. You will go there. And you will build yourself up. You will become undeniable. And when the time is right, you will come back." The night of the escape was freezing. A winter storm was battering the coast, masking the sound of my movements. I waited in the dark of my room, dressed in layers of stolen clothes I had scavenged from the lost and found. At 3:55 in the morning, I slipped out of my window. Evelyn had loosened the screws on the plexiglass over the course of 2 weeks. I crawled across the wet grass, the freezing rain stinging my face. I reached the loading dock just as the laundry truck rumbled in. I hid behind a stack of crates, my breath coming in short, terrified gasps. I saw Evelyn inside. She looked at the clock on the wall. She caught my eye through the glass door and gave a barely perceptible nod. Then, she kicked the bucket. The gallon of bleach splashed across the concrete floor. Mixing with an ammonia-based cleaner she had accidentally left there, the reaction was instant. A cloud of noxious white gas rose up. "My God," the guard coughed, covering his mouth. "Vance, you clumsy idiot, open the doors, everybody out." The guard and the driver stumbled out of the side door, hacking and coughing, eyes watering. This was it. I sprinted. I ran across the loading dock, the smell of chlorine burning my throat. I vaulted into the back of the truck, landing on a pile of soiled bedsheets. The smell was revolting sweat and sickness, but to me, it smelled like freedom. I burrowed deep into the pile, pulling the heavy canvas bags over my head. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure they would hear it. Minutes later, the driver returned, still cursing the janitor. The engine roared to life. The truck lurched forward. I felt the rumble of the tires as we passed through the gates. I lay in the dark, clutching the money Evelyn had given me, tears streaming down my face. I was leaving everything behind, my name, my past, my family. But as the truck hit the highway and picked up speed, I remembered Evelyn's parting words to me. "Do not look back. Laura, the girl who entered Serenity is dead. You are someone else now. Go and find her." I closed my eyes and let the rhythm of the road lull me into a restless sleep. I was no longer a prisoner. I was a ghost. And the thing about ghosts is that they always come back to haunt the living. Seattle was the perfect place to disappear. It was a city of rain and reinvention, where the old tech giants were fading and a new, hungrier generation was rising from the concrete. I arrived with the $2,000 Evelyn had given me and a new name, Laura Whitcomb, the heiress, the addict, the failure, died somewhere on Interstate 90. The woman who stepped off the Greyhound bus was Lara V. The V stood for nothing. It was a cliff edge. It was the void where my past used to be. The first 2 years were a blur of survival. I did not live. I functioned. I rented a basement apartment in a neighborhood where the police sirens were the nightly lullaby. The walls were damp, and the radiator hissed like a dying snake. But it had a lock that I bought and installed myself. That lock was my most prized possession. I worked 3 jobs. By day, I scrubbed dishes in the back of a Vietnamese noodle shop, my hands red and raw from the hot water and harsh soap. By evening, I stocked shelves at a grocery store. And at night, from midnight until 4 in the morning, I worked as an under-the-table paralegal for a disbarred lawyer who operated out of a strip mall. He was a crook, but he was brilliant. He taught me how to hide money. He taught me how shell companies worked. He taught me how to bury a name so deep that even God would need a subpoena to find it. I absorbed everything. I was a sponge dipped in motor oil, but the real transformation happened in the terrifying silence of the early morning hours. When I sat in front of a refurbished laptop I had bought at a pawn shop, I had abandoned architecture. Buildings were static. They were heavy, slow, and expensive. I did not want to build monuments anymore. I wanted to build a weapon. And in the 21st century, the most dangerous weapon is not a gun. It is data. I began to teach myself to code. I started with Python and SQL, devouring online courses and pirated textbooks. I learned to scrape databases. I learned to trace digital footprints. I realized that the real estate industry, my father's kingdom, was an archaic beast. It was built on handshakes, paper trails, and inflated valuations. It was a system designed to be exploited by liars like Robert Harrington. It was ripe for disruption. I reconnected with Evelyn on a burner phone 18 months after my escape. Her voice was the first familiar thing I had heard in an eternity. "Are you safe?" she asked. "I am alive," I answered. "Safety is a luxury I cannot afford yet." "Good," she said. "Comfort makes you soft. I have made some calls. Lara, there are people in this world who hate your father almost as much as we do. Men he cheated, women he silenced, investors he left holding the bag on his failed projects. I have arranged a meeting." The meeting was with a man named Marcus Chen, a venture capitalist who had lost $10 million in one of my father's guaranteed condo developments in Miami. Marcus was known for being ruthless, but Evelyn assured me he was a man of his word. I walked into his office wearing a suit I had bought at a thrift store and tailored myself. I looked tired, but my eyes were clear. I did not pitch him a product. I pitched him revenge. "I am building an algorithm," I told him. "It does not just look at property values. It scrapes permit filings, court records, lien histories, and contractor disputes. It uses artificial intelligence to predict which developments are viable and which ones are Ponzi schemes. It is a lie detector test for the entire real estate market." Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, studying me. "And why should I fund you, Ms. V?" "Because the first company I'm going to analyze is Harrington Estates," I said. "And I am going to give you the evidence you need to sue them into the ground." He wrote a check for $250,000 on the spot. That was the seed money. At 24 years old, I founded Veritas Analytics. We did not have a flashy launch party. We did not have a ribbon-cutting ceremony. We started in a shared workspace with 3 servers and 2 other engineers I had poached from a cybersecurity firm. Our mission was simple: truth. In the world of high-stakes real estate, truth is a commodity that no one wants to buy but everyone needs to fear. Veritas became the gold standard for due diligence. Banks started hiring us to audit loan applications. Insurance companies hired us to assess risk. We grew fast. By the time I was 26, Veritas was analyzing billions of dollars in transactions every month. We were the invisible hand checking the pulse of the market, and every time a developer tried to inflate their assets or hide their debts, my algorithm flagged it. We were dubbed the deal killers by the industry press. I loved that nickname. I stayed in the shadows. I was the CEO, but I never gave interviews. I never appeared on panels. My public face was a carefully curated void. To the world, Veritas was a faceless algorithm. To my employees, I was Ms. V, the workaholic boss who never slept and seemed to know a fraud was happening before the criminal even finished signing the paperwork. And while I built my empire, I watched my family destroy theirs. It was a slow-motion car crash, and I had a front-row seat. I had set up alerts for every mention of the Harrington name in the press. every court filing, every credit report. Chloe was the first to stumble, without me there to be her scapegoat. The cracks in her perfect facade began to widen. She dropped out of college after one semester. She tried to launch a fashion line, funded by Daddy, which failed spectacularly within 6 months. The tabloids loved her. They chronicled her nights at clubs, her DUIs, which disappeared after donations were made to the Police Benevolent Fund, and her chaotic romantic life. She married a hedge fund manager when she was 22. It was the wedding of the century. 6 months later, it was the divorce of the year. He left her because she was emotionally volatile and spent money like it was oxygen. 2 years later, she married a minor European prince. That lasted 11 months. By the time she was 26, Chloe was twice divorced and drowning in credit card debt. I accessed her credit report one night, a petty indulgence. I admit, she owed $300,000 to American Express alone. She was living on an allowance from Robert, but it was never enough to fill the void inside her. She looked hollow in the paparazzi photos, her eyes glassy, her smile strained. The predator had become the prey of her own appetites. And then there was Robert and Victoria. Harrington Estates was rotting from the inside out. My father had not changed his business model in 30 years. He was still borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, moving debt around like a shell game, but the market had changed. Lenders were more cautious, and more importantly, Veritas was watching. I remember the day I finally drew blood. Robert was trying to secure a $100 million loan for a massive mixed-use development in Jersey City. It was his Hail Mary pass. If the deal went through, he could pay off his debts and refinance the Hamptons house. The bank that was underwriting the loan was a client of Veritas. I personally oversaw the audit of the Harrington file. My algorithm chewed through his application. It found the discrepancies immediately. He had inflated the projected rental income by 40%. He had hidden a toxic lien on the land by filing it under a subsidiary I knew existed only because I had once heard him discuss it at the dinner table 10 years ago. I did not have to do anything illegal. I just highlighted the data. I generated the report. I stamped it with the Veritas seal of disapproval. The bank killed the loan the next morning. I watched the fallout from my office on the 45th floor of a skyscraper in Seattle. The stock price of Harrington Estates tumbled 15% in a single day. Robert went on CNBC, red-faced and sweating, blaming market volatility and risk-averse lenders. He had no idea that the risk algorithm that had just cut his throat was written by the daughter he had thrown away. Year 8, Year 9, I became wealthy. Not just trust fund wealthy, but self-made, untouchable wealthy. My net worth crossed the $50 million mark. Then the $100 million mark. I bought a penthouse. I bought art. I bought the freedom that Evelyn had promised me. But I did not buy happiness. Happiness was not the goal. Completion was the goal. I kept the $3.6 million trust fund in the back of my mind like a loaded gun. I knew the terms. I knew that as my 30th birthday approached, their desperation would peak. Harrington Estates was now teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. They had liquidated their commercial holdings. They had sold the private jet. The only thing left was the Hamptons estate and the illusion of wealth they desperately clung to. I knew they were looking for liquidity. I knew they were looking for a miracle. And I knew exactly when they would remember me. 6 months before my 30th birthday. The alerts on my system spiked. My father's lawyers were running searches. They were looking for death certificates. They were looking for arrest records. They were trying to find out if Laura Whitcomb was dead or alive. They found nothing. I had scrubbed Laura Whitcomb from the digital world. As far as the internet was concerned, she had vanished into the ether 10 years ago. That was the trap. By finding nothing, they assumed I was weak. They assumed I was destitute. They assumed I was the same broken girl who needed guardians. I let them believe it. I let them file the paperwork. I let them set the date for the hearing. I sat in my office, looking at the court summons that had been delivered to an old PO box I kept active just for this purpose. I ran my thumb over the embossed seal of the state of New York. "Are you ready?" Evelyn asked me. She was sitting on my sofa, drinking tea. She looked older now, her hair completely white, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. She was no longer a janitor. She was the silent partner in Veritas, living comfortably in a condo I had bought for her. "I have been ready for 10 years, I said. I picked up the phone and dialed my assistant. "Clear my schedule for next week," I said, "and prepare the jet. We are going to New York. Business or pleasure?" "Ms. V," my assistant asked. I looked at the skyline of Seattle, the city that had adopted me, the city where I had forged myself in fire. "Neither," I said. "It is a family reunion." I hung up the phone. The montage was over. The building phase was complete. Now, it was time for the demolition. I picked up a pen and signed the acknowledgement of the summons. My hand did not shake. My signature was sharp, angular, and final. They wanted a hearing, I would give them a hearing. They wanted to prove I was incompetent, I would show them exactly what I was capable of. I was not just coming for my $3.6 million. That was pocket change to me now. I was coming for their dignity. I was coming for their reputation. I was coming to take the only thing they had left, their lies. The game was set. The players were in position, and the queen was coming home to take the king. The countdown to my 30th birthday was not marked by party planning or the anticipation of gifts. It was marked by the silent, rhythmic ticking of a clock I had set in motion 10 years ago. In the high-stakes world of venture capital and forensic analytics, timing is everything. You do not strike when you are ready. You strike when your enemy is overextended, desperate, and blind. My family was all three. For the past decade, I had been a ghost to the world. Laura Whitcomb was a tragic footnote in the Harrington family history, a troubled girl who had vanished into the drug-riddled underbelly of America. To ensure this narrative remained intact, I had to feed it. I could not simply disappear. I had to give them a trail to follow. But it had to be a trail that led them exactly where I wanted them to go. 6 months prior, I had instructed my security team to reactivate a dormant identity I had created during my first year in Seattle. It was attached to a rented mailbox in a dilapidated strip mall in a low-income district of Portland, Oregon. It was a masterpiece of misdirection. We generated fake utility bills, a few overdue notices from payday lenders, and a subscription to a mental health newsletter. We created a paper ghost of a woman who was struggling, poor, and barely holding on. I knew my father's lawyers would be sweeping for me. With the trust fund maturity date approaching, they had to serve me with notice of the competency hearing. If they could not find me, they would have to petition for a ruling in absentia, which was messy and took time they did not have. They needed a body. They needed to look a judge in the eye and say, "We found her, and she is a wreck." So, I gave them a wreck. I was sitting in my corner office on the 45th floor of the Veritas Tower in Seattle when the bait was taken. My office is a fortress of glass and steel, overlooking the Puget Sound. It smells of espresso and expensive leather, a far cry from the bleach and despair of the Serenity Recovery Center. My assistant, a sharp young man named David, buzzed in. "Ms. V," he said, his voice calm. "The package has been forwarded from the Portland Dropbox. It arrived via courier this morning. Do you want me to bring it in?" "Yes, David," I said. "Bring it in immediately." He placed the large manila envelope on my desk. It was battered. Having traveled through 3 different forwarding services before reaching my sanctuary, the return address was embossed in gold leaf sterling. Halloway Associates, my father's law firm, the same firm that had drafted the paperwork to commit me 10 years ago. I did not open it immediately. I just stared at it. Inside that envelope was the culmination of their greed. They were not just asking for a continuance of the conservatorship. They were declaring war on my autonomy. I turned on the wall-mounted television screen. I needed to see the public face of this private aggression. I switched the channel to a national morning talk show. There she was, Victoria. She was sitting on a plush beige sofa, opposite a sympathetic host who was leaning in with an expression of practiced concern. Victoria was wearing a soft pastel cardigan, a deliberate choice to make her look maternal and harmless. She held a tissue in her hand, twisting it nervously. "It has been a nightmare. Honestly," Victoria said, her voice cracking perfectly on cue. "We have not seen Laura in 10 years. We have hired private investigators. We have chased leads every time the phone rings. I pray it is her, and I pray she is safe." The host nodded solemnly. "And now, with her 30th birthday approaching, there is a legal matter regarding her inheritance. Is that correct?" Victoria sighed, a sound of heavy burdens carried with grace. "The money, frankly. We do not care about the money. The money is a curse. It was my mother-in-law's way of trying to help. But giving $3.6 million to someone with Laura's condition, it is like handing a loaded gun to a child. We just want to protect her. We have filed a petition to extend the guardianship so that we can use those resources to get her the help she needs. We just want our little girl to come home." I picked up the remote and muted the sound. The silence in my office was deafening. "Liar," I whispered. The audacity was breathtaking. They did not want me home. They wanted the check. I knew the numbers better than they did. I had hacked their internal ledgers weeks ago. The Harrington Group was technically insolvent. They had missed 3 consecutive interest payments on their primary construction loans. Chloe had run up gambling debts in Monaco that were being held by people who broke legs for a living. They needed $3.6 million by the end of the month, or the house of cards would collapse. I finally reached for the envelope. I slid it open with a silver letter opener. The legal language was brutal. It was a petition for a permanent conservatorship of the person and estate. The allegations were laid out in bullet points, designed to paint a picture of a woman who was a danger to herself and society. The respondent, Laura Whitcomb, has a history of severe paranoid schizophrenia and substance abuse. The respondent has been missing for a decade, living a transient lifestyle with no known employment or fixed address. The respondent has failed to seek medical treatment for her condition. The petitioners, Robert and Victoria Harrington, humbly request full legal authority to manage the respondent's assets to prevent waste and ensure her safety. They were using my silence against me. They assumed that because I had not been seen at gala dinners or on the cover of magazines, I must be destitute. They assumed that my lack of communication was proof of my insanity. They had fallen for the classic blunder of the arrogant. They assumed that their world was the only world that mattered. If you were not in their club, you did not exist. I pressed the intercom button. "David, get Evelyn on the secure line. Tell her it has arrived." A moment later, Evelyn's voice filled the room. She was no longer the janitor scrubbing floors. She was my consigliere, her voice sharp and authoritative. "Read it to me," she commanded. I summarized the document. When I got to the part about my transient lifestyle, Evelyn let out a short, dry laugh. "They really have no idea. Do you think?" she asked. "None," I replied. "They sent this to a P.O. box next to a pawn shop. They think I'm going to show up to court in rags, begging for a handout. And the hearing date? 2 weeks from today," I said. "Tuesday, 9 in the morning, Supreme Court, New York County." "It is a trap, Laura," Evelyn warned, though her tone suggested she knew I was already aware of it. "If you step into that courtroom, they will have doctors waiting. They will try to have you committed immediately, before you can even speak. They will claim you are agitated. They will try to trigger you." I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Seattle lay spread out below me, a grid of lights and rain. I owned 3 buildings in this skyline. I employed 400 people. I had advised the Treasury Department on real estate fraud. "Let them try," I said. "They are preparing for a street fight with a teenager. They are not preparing for a hostile takeover." "Are you going to respond through counsel?" Evelyn asked. "No," I said. "If I hire a high-powered firm now, it tips my hand. They will know I have resources. They will panic and maybe try to withdraw or settle. I need them to be confident. I need them to walk into that courtroom thinking they have already won." I looked at the document again. There was a section for the respondent to acknowledge receipt and indicate if they would attend. "I am going to sign it myself," I told Evelyn. "I will send it back via regular mail. No lawyer's letterhead. Just a scribbled signature. Let them think I am representing myself. Let them think I am foolish enough to walk into the lion's den alone. It is risky, Evelyn said. If the judge is in their pocket. The judge is Harrison Cole, I interrupted. I checked the docket. He is tough, but he is a stickler for procedure. He does not like your father's lawyer. Sterling. They have bad blood from a murder case 5 years ago. Cole will give me a chance to speak, if only to annoy Sterling, and that is all I need. 5 minutes. And the evidence. It is all compiled, I said. The forensic accounting on Harrington Estates, the video footage from the party 10 years ago that we recovered from the security firm's archives, the bank transfers Victoria made to the nurse. It is all in the briefcase. Then do it, Evelyn said softly. Finish them. I hung up the phone. I took a pen from my desk, a Mont Blanc, that cost more than my first car, and signed the document. Laura Whitcomb. The signature was shaky, deliberately messy. I wanted them to look at it and see weakness. I wanted them to see a trembling hand. I walked over to the mirror in the corner of my office. I looked at the woman staring back. The tailored suit, the sharp haircut, the eyes that had seen the bottom of the barrel and the top of the world. I thought about the comments I had seen scrolling under Victoria's interview online. Poor parents. It must be so hard to have a child like that. Addiction is a disease. Hope she gets help. Ungrateful brat, leaving her family like that. The public sympathy was a warm blanket wrapped around a rotting corpse. My family was banking on that sympathy. They were banking on the narrative that I was the problem and they were the saviors. They had no idea that the ungrateful brat was about to foreclose on their entire existence. I buzzed David again. Mail this, I said. And David booked the flight to New York and called Julian Thorne. There was a pause on the other end. The former Attorney General. Ms. V, he is expensive. I know, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. Tell him I do not want him to file anything. I just want him to stand in the hallway and look scary until I call him in. Tell him it is a show trial, and he is the surprise witness. Understood. I sat back in my chair. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the office. In New York, my father was probably pouring a scotch, toasting to his cleverness. He probably thought he had solved all his problems. He had found the runaway daughter. He had served the papers. In 2 weeks, he would have the money. He was right about one thing. In 2 weeks, the accounts would be settled. But the currency would not be dollars. It would be ruin. I picked up the remote and unmuted the TV. Victoria was still talking, wiping a tear from her cheek. We just want to be a family again, she sobbed. Be careful what you wish for, Victoria. I said to the screen, you are going to get exactly what you asked for. The family is getting back together, and this time, nobody is leaving the room until the truth comes out. I turned off the TV, plunging the room into silence. I was ready. The courtroom was a theater, and the Harrington family had clearly spent weeks rehearsing their blocking. They arrived 5 minutes early, a calculated move to show respect for the court, while allowing the press photographer stationed in the hallway to capture the perfect image of their somber unity. I watched them enter from my seat at the defendant's table. I was wearing large, black sunglasses, sitting perfectly still, my hands folded on the empty table before me. To the casual observer, I looked like a hungover celebrity trying to hide from the paparazzi, or perhaps a mental patient overwhelmed by the sensory input of the room. That was exactly what I wanted them to see. My father, Robert, led the procession. He had ditched his usual Italian silk suits for something in a muted, department store navy blue. It was ill-fitting enough to suggest humility, but expensive enough to suggest he was a man of means who had simply fallen on hard times due to the emotional burden of his daughter. He walked with a slight stoop, a physical affectation he had never possessed in his life, designed to simulate the weight of fatherly grief. Victoria walked half a step behind him, clutching his arm. She was wearing a beige cardigan over a floral dress, a grandmotherly outfit that screamed harmlessness. She had forgone her usual heavy makeup for a pale, washed-out look that highlighted the dark circles she had likely painted on under her eyes. She carried a rosary in her left hand, fingering the beads nervously. It was a nice touch, considering Victoria had not stepped foot inside a church since her wedding day 20 years ago. And then there was Chloe. My sister had clearly studied the courtroom tapes of every fallen starlet in Hollywood history. She wore a high-collared black blouse and a long skirt. Her hair pulled back in a severe, modest ponytail. She looked young, fragile, and terrified. She kept her eyes glued to the floor, refusing to look in my direction, as if the mere sight of me would cause her to shatter into 1,000 pieces. They took their seats at the plaintiff's table. Their lawyer, Arthur Sterling, was already there, arranging his files with geometric precision. Sterling was a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that produced sharks in human skin. He was tanned, manicured, and radiated a sleek, oily confidence. He nodded to Robert, a gesture that said, "Relax." The check cleared, and the script is written. Judge Harrison Cole entered the room. The bailiff called for order. We all stood. Judge Cole was a man of no nonsense, with a face carved from granite and eyes that had seen every variation of human deceit New York City had to offer. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked at the docket. In the matter of the conservatorship of Laura Whitcomb, Judge Cole read. His voice was a dry baritone. He looked over his spectacles at the two tables. I see the petitioners are present, and the respondent, Ms. Whitcomb. I did not speak. I simply nodded once, keeping my sunglasses on. Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket. Your Honor, Arthur Sterling representing the parents, Mr. Robert and Mrs. Victoria Harrington. We are here today with heavy hearts to request a permanent conservatorship over the person and estate of their daughter, Laura. Proceed, Counselor, the judge said. Leaning back, Sterling walked to the center of the room, turning slightly so his profile caught the best light. Your Honor, this is not a case about money. This is a tragedy about a young woman lost to the demons of mental illness. For 10 years, Laura Whitcomb has been a ghost. She has wandered the country, homeless, unemployed, and untreated for severe paranoid schizophrenia. Her parents have spent a decade searching for her, agonizing over her safety. He gestured toward me with an open palm, as if presenting a defective product. Ms. Whitcomb is about to turn 30. Under the terms of her late grandmother's trust, she is set to inherit $3.6 million, Your Honor. Placing that amount of money in the hands of a person with no fixed address, no job history, and a documented history of drug abuse is not just irresponsible, it is a death sentence. We are not trying to take her money. We are trying to save her life. He paused for effect. The room was silent. Even the court stenographer looked sympathetic. We have submitted into evidence the medical reports from the Serenity Recovery Center. Dated 10 years ago, Sterling continued. They paint a clear picture. The respondent suffers from violent outbursts, auditory hallucinations, and a complete detachment from reality. We also have an updated affidavit from Dr. Aris Thorne, no relation to the former Attorney General, of course, who reviewed her case file and confirms that without treatment. This condition is degenerative. It gets worse, Your Honor. It does not get better on its own. I listened to him weave his tapestry of lies. The medical reports he was referencing were works of fiction, bought and paid for by Victoria's hush money. The updated affidavit was from a doctor who had lost his license in 3 states and now sold his signature to the highest bidder. Call your first witness, the judge said. We call Chloe Harrington, Sterling said. Chloe stood up. She trembled visibly. It was a masterclass in physical acting. She walked to the stand, took the oath, and sat down, clutching the railing until her knuckles turned white. Ms. Harrington, Sterling asked softly, using his gentle voice now. Can you tell the court about your relationship with your sister? Chloe sniffled. She reached for the box of tissues placed conveniently on the stand. I love her, she whispered. I have always loved her, but I'm afraid of her. Why are you afraid? Chloe. Because of the voices, Chloe said. looking up at the judge with wide, watery eyes. When we were teenagers, she used to tell me that people were watching her. She would get so angry for no reason. She would scream at empty rooms. She wiped a tear. There was one night before she left, she came into my room with a pair of scissors. She said I was stealing her thoughts. She cut my hair while I was sleeping. I woke up screaming. Daddy had to pull her away from me. I sat there, expressionless behind my dark glasses. The memory of that night came back clearly. I remembered Chloe standing in front of the mirror, cutting her hair unevenly and laughing hysterically. All of it staged to trap me because I had refused to let her use my car. It has been 10 years. Chloe, Sterling said, why do you believe she needs a guardian now? Because she can't live independently, Chloe cried, her voice swelling with exaggerated concern. If you give her that money, she'll completely ruin herself within a week. I know it. She doesn't know how to look after herself. She's unstable. Your Honor, please don't let her destroy her own future. Please let Daddy take care of her. She covered her face with her hands and began to cry. Victoria mirrored the act at the table, gently wiping her eyes. Robert put an arm around his wife, his face carefully composed, filled with well-rehearsed sorrow. It was flawless. It was disturbing. It was the most convincing performance I had ever seen. Sterling let the moment hang in the air for a full 10 seconds before speaking. No further questions, Your Honor. Judge Cole looked at Chloe, then at the weeping parents, and finally, he turned his gaze to me. I could feel the weight of the room shifting. The narrative was set. I was the villain, the lunatic, the ticking time bomb. They were the saints. Ms. Whitcomb, Judge Cole said. I did not move. Ms. Whitcomb, he repeated, louder this time. Do you have legal representation present in the court today? I remained silent. Sterling stood up, shaking his head sadly. Your Honor, as I stated, the respondent is likely catatonic or confused. We offered to pay for a lawyer for her, but she did not respond to any of our communications. This silence is just further proof of her incapacity. I will determine that. Mr. Sterling, Judge Cole snapped. He looked at me again. Ms. Whitcomb, you are the respondent in this petition. A request has been made to strip you of your civil liberties and place your estate under the control of your father. Do you understand what is happening? I slowly tilted my head. The court asks you, the judge continued, his patience thinning. Do you have any evidence to refute these claims? Do you have proof of a fixed address? Do you have proof of income? Can you demonstrate to this court that you are capable of managing $3.6 million? The room held its breath. Chloe peeked through her fingers, waiting for me to scream, or mumble, or throw a shoe. Robert leaned forward, a predator waiting for the kill. I moved. I reached up with both hands. The movement was slow, deliberate, and controlled. I took hold of the frames of my sunglasses. I pulled them off and placed them gently on the table. The click of the plastic against the wood echoed in the silent room. I looked up. For the first time in 10 years, my family saw my eyes. They were not the bloodshot, hazy eyes of an addict. They were not the darting, fearful eyes of a schizophrenic. They were clear, cold, and incredibly sharp. They were the eyes of a woman who had spent a decade staring at spreadsheets until she found the truth in the numbers. They were the eyes of a CEO who had fired men twice her age without blinking. I stood up. I did not slouch. I did not sway. I rose to my full height, my posture impeccable, my spine a rod of steel. I unbuttoned my jacket, the oversized, shapeless coat I had worn over my clothes, and let it slide off my shoulders onto the chair behind me. Underneath, I was wearing a bespoke suit from Savile Row, charcoal gray wool that cost $5,000. My shirt was crisp white silk. On my wrist, the platinum Patek Philippe caught the overhead lights, gleaming like a weapon. The transformation was instantaneous. The homeless drifter vanished. In her place stood a titan of industry. A gasp went through the room. It started from the press gallery and rippled forward. I saw Robert's jaw go slack. The grieving father mask slipped, revealing pure, Unadulterated shock. Victoria stopped crying mid-sob, the tissue freezing halfway to her face. Chloe lowered her hands, her mouth opening in a silent, "Oh." They were not looking at a victim anymore. They were looking at a mirror, and the reflection was terrifying. I looked directly at the judge. I did not look at my family. They were not worth my gaze yet. "Your Honor," I said. My voice was not the shrill, hysterical voice Chloe had mimicked. It was low, modulated, and commanded absolute authority. It was the voice I used to close $100 million deals. "I apologize for the theatrics. I merely wanted to allow my family to finish their performance before I began my reality." Sterling scrambled to his feet. "Objection. Your Honor, the respondent she is," he stammered, staring at my suit, at the watch, at the sheer force of presence radiating from the defendant's table. He did not know what to object to. Being well-dressed was not a crime. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Judge Cole said. He was leaning forward now, his boredom replaced by intense curiosity. He looked at me with new appraisal. "You have the floor, Ms. Whitcomb. You may answer the court's question regarding your income and residence." I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. "Regarding my residence," I said, my voice carrying to the back of the room without a microphone. "I own a penthouse in Seattle, a condo in San Francisco, and a brownstone in London. However, for the purpose of legal jurisdiction, my primary domicile is Washington State." I paused, letting that sink in. "And regarding my income," I continued, turning slightly to look at my father, locking eyes with him as the color drained from his face. "The petitioners are concerned that I cannot manage $3.6 million. I can understand their concern. $3.6 million is a significant amount of money to them." I picked up the file lying on the table, the file they thought was empty. "However," I said, "to me, $3.6 million represents approximately 12 days of operating revenue for my company. I do not need my grandmother's money to survive. Your Honor, I am here because I refuse to let these people use it to pay off the $40 million in bad debt they are currently hiding from their shareholders." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb that had just detonated, in that split second before the shockwave hits. Robert stood up, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "She is lying. She is delusional. It is part of the sickness." "Is it?" I asked calmly. I turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, you asked if I had representation. I do. He has been waiting in the corridor because his presence tends to be disruptive to those who have secrets to hide." I looked at the double doors at the back of the courtroom. "You may enter," I said. The doors swung open. The air in the room didn't just change, it evaporated. My family stared at the open doors, and I saw the exact moment their hearts stopped beating. The trap was sprung, the play was over, and the executioner had just walked in. Judge Cole leaned over the bench, his eyebrows knitted together in a frown that usually preceded a contempt of court citation. The silence I had created with my statement about the money was fragile, and the judge was looking for a reason to shatter it. He adjusted his glasses, looking from my bespoke suit to the empty chair beside me. "Ms. Whitcomb," he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous room, "you have made some very bold claims about your assets. Claims that, quite frankly, contradict every piece of evidence submitted by the petitioners. But a suit and a watch do not constitute a legal defense. Where is your attorney? Or are you asking the court to appoint a public defender to help you navigate this competency hearing?" I looked at the judge, then slowly turned my head to look at the gallery. The reporters were leaning forward, pens poised over notebooks. My father was staring at me, his mouth slightly open, a bead of sweat tracking a path down his temple. He looked like a man trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces kept changing shape. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a chess player who sees the mate in one. "Your Honor," I said, my voice ringing out clear and steady, vibrating with the confidence of someone who owns the building they are standing in. I do not require a public defender. I do not require charity. My legal counsel has been waiting in the corridor at my instruction." "At your instruction?" Judge Cole asked, skeptical. "Why would you have your lawyer wait outside during the opening statements?" "Because," I said, locking eyes with Arthur Sterling, whose oily tan seemed to be fading rapidly. "I wanted to give my family and Mr. Sterling the opportunity to enter their lies into the official court record without interruption. I wanted every perjured statement, every fabricated medical history, and every false tear to be transcribed by the stenographer before we began the real proceedings. I believe in giving people enough rope to hang themselves, Your Honor, and they have used it quite generously." "This is outrageous," Sterling sputtered, jumping to his feet. "Your Honor, the respondent is clearly mocking the court." "Open the doors," I said. I did not shout. I did not have to. The bailiff looked at the judge. Judge Cole nodded once, intrigued. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a groan that sounded like the lid of a tomb being lifted. A man stepped through the threshold. He was tall, over 6'2", with silver hair cut in a military-precise style and shoulders that filled out his dark navy suit. He did not walk. He marched. He carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had seen battles, and his face was a map of hard-won victories. He was not Evelyn. The air was sucked out of the room. A collective gasp went up from the press gallery. I heard a reporter in the second row whisper, "Holy Mother of God," at the plaintiff's table. The reaction was visceral. My father, Robert Harrington, went white. It was not a gradual pallor. The blood simply fled his face instantly. His hand, which had been holding a gold fountain pen, went limp. The pen slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor. In the silence of the room, it sounded like a gunshot. Victoria let out a small, strangled squeak and grabbed Robert's arm, her fingernails digging into his sleeve. Even Arthur Sterling, the shark, looked like he had just spotted a megalodon. He took a half-step back, bumping into his chair. The man walking down the center aisle was Julian Thorne. For 20 years, Julian Thorne had been the Attorney General of New York State. He was a legend. He was a myth. They called him the Razor in the press. But in legal circles, he was simply known as the End. He did not lose cases. He obliterated opponents. He was the man who had taken down the 5 families. He was the man who had prosecuted the Wall Street insider trading ring of the early 2000s. He was a prosecutor who hunted corruption with a religious fervor, and he had retired 6 months ago. The legal world had mourned the loss of its sharpest blade. Everyone assumed he was on a beach in Maui, or perhaps writing his memoirs. No one expected him to walk into a family court hearing on a Tuesday morning. Julian did not look at the press. He did not look at the stunned family. He walked straight to the defense table, opened the small gate, and stood beside me. He placed his briefcase on the table next to my sunglasses. "Good morning, Your Honor," Julian said. His voice was gravel and thunder. Judge Cole blinked. He actually took his glasses off and rubbed his eyes, as if to ensure he wasn't hallucinating. "Mr. Thorne?" the judge asked, his voice losing its judicial detachment. "General Thorne, you are representing the respondent." "I am, Your Honor." Julian said. He did not sit down. He stood like a sentinel. "I was under the impression you had retired from practice," Judge Cole said, "and I certainly did not know you took civil cases. You haven't stepped foot in a family court in 20 years. "I made an exception," Julian said. He turned his head slowly, fixing his gaze on Arthur Sterling. Sterling withered under the look. It was the look of a wolf assessing a particularly slow rabbit. "I have a distinct distaste for bullies, Judge Cole, and I have an even greater distaste for officers of the court who knowingly present forged documents to a tribunal." Sterling went from pale to a blotchy red. That is a serious accusation. Mr. Thorne." "It is not an accusation," Julian corrected him smoothly. "It is a preview of your disbarment hearing." Julian turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I apologize for my late entry. Ms. Whitcomb and I agreed that it was tactically necessary to allow Miss Sterling to fully commit to his narrative before we dismantled it. Dismantled it? The judge asked. Completely, Julian said. My father finally found his voice. It was shaky, a thin reed of sound. This is ridiculous. How can she afford you? You are Julian Thorne. She is a homeless addict. How is she paying you? Robert was clinging to the only reality he understood: money. In his mind, I was broke. Julian Thorne billed at $2,000 an hour when he was in private practice. And as a former AG, his rate would be astronomical. The math didn't work in Robert's head. Julian turned to face my father. He looked at him with a mixture of pity and amusement. Mr. Harrington, Julian said, you seem to be laboring under a significant misunderstanding regarding your daughter's financial status. She has nothing, Robert snapped, desperation leaking into his tone. She is living in a shelter. We have the reports. You have reports on a ghost, Julian said. You have been chasing a shadow my client created to keep you occupied while she bought your future. Julian placed a hand on my shoulder. It was a gesture of respect, not protection. He was not shielding me. He was presenting me. I am not just Ms. Whitcomb's attorney, Julian announced, his voice projecting to the back of the room. I am the general counsel and chief legal officer for Veritas Analytics. The room went silent again. Veritas Analytics. The name hung in the air. Everyone in the room knew Veritas. It was the terrifying, faceless tech giant that had revolutionized the real estate market. It was the company that had destroyed the careers of corrupt developers. It was the company that every bank in New York used to vet their loans. It was a company valued in the billions. Robert frowned. Veritas? What does that have to do with Laura? Julian smiled. It was a shark smile. Mr. Harrington, Julian said softly, you are looking at the founder and majority shareholder of Veritas Analytics. Miss Laura Whitcomb is not my client in the traditional sense. She is my boss. The shockwave hit. Robert staggered back as if he had been physically struck. He grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself. Victoria let out a gasp that sounded like a tire blowing out. Chloe's mouth fell open, her eyes darting between me and Julian, trying to process the impossibility of the statement. No, Robert whispered. That is impossible. Veritas is owned by a holding company. It is anonymous. The CEO is Lara V. Lara V, I said, speaking for the first time since Julian entered. Laura Vance. I took my grandmother's maiden name for the incorporation documents. Did you never wonder why the company that denied your loan applications seemed to know exactly where you hid your debt? Father? Robert looked at me, and the horror in his eyes was absolute. The pieces were slamming into place. The denied loans, the leaked reports about his insolvency, the investors who had suddenly pulled out. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't the market. It was me. You, Robert stammered. You own Veritas. I built it, I said coldly. From nothing. While you were spending the last of the family fortune trying to maintain an image, I was building an empire designed to audit yours. Julian stepped forward. Opening his briefcase, he pulled out a thick stack of documents bound in red tape. Your Honor, Julian said, Ms. Whitcomb is not here to ask for the $3.6 million in the trust. As she stated, that is a trivial sum to her. Veritas Analytics posted a net profit of $140 million last quarter alone. He dropped the file on the judge's bench with a heavy thud. We are here to discuss a different financial matter, Julian continued. Over the last 18 months, Veritas Analytics has been quietly purchasing the distressed debt of Harrington Estates from various creditors. We bought the construction loans. We bought the mortgages on the commercial properties. We even bought the personal promissory notes, Mr. Harrington signed to cover his gambling losses. Julian turned to the gallery, ensuring the press heard every word. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Julian declared, Ms. Whitcomb effectively owns 40% of the total debt obligations of Harrington Estates. She is not just a solvent adult, Your Honor. She is the primary creditor of the petitioners. The room erupted. Reporters were shouting questions. The judge was banging his gavel, but the sound was drowned out by the chaos. I watched my father. He looked like a man watching a tsunami crest over his head. He looked at me, pleadingly, searching for the daughter he had bullied, the girl he had silenced. He didn't find her. He found the CEO of Veritas. He found the woman who held the mortgage on his soul. 40%, Robert whispered, his face gray. You own the debt. I own you, Dad, I said softly, my voice cutting through the noise. I own the house you sleep in. I own the chair you are sitting on. I own the company you inherited and ran into the ground. Order, Judge Cole bellowed, standing up. Order in this court. The noise subsided to a dull roar. Mr. Thorne, Judge Cole said, his voice shaking slightly, are you telling me that the respondent, whom the petitioners claim is a homeless schizophrenic, is actually a tech billionaire? That is correct, Your Honor, Julian said smoothly. And if the court pleases, we would like to move on to the evidence regarding the perjury, the fraud, and the kidnapping committed by the petitioners 10 years ago. We have brought video. Robert slumped into his chair. He looked small. He looked defeated. He looked exactly how I had felt the night they dragged me out of the gala. Victoria was weeping openly now, but these were not stage tears. These were tears of terror. She knew what was coming. She knew that money couldn't fix this. I sat back in my chair and crossed my legs. I checked my watch. The hearing had been going on for 20 minutes. You were right, Julian, I said quietly to my lawyer. They've completely trapped themselves. We haven't even made our move yet, Julian murmured in reply. Just wait until they see the video. I glanced at Chloe. She was looking at me with a mix of fear and amazement. She had always admired power and wealth, and in that instant, she understood she had spent her entire life backing the wrong side. I gave her a small wink. She recoiled slightly. Proceed, Mr. Thorne, Judge Cole said as he sat back down, his gaze fixed on my family with icy intensity. I am very interested in what you've brought in that briefcase. The surprise had landed. The message was clear. Now it was time to press the advantage. I gave Julian a subtle nod, barely noticeable. But in the tense atmosphere of the courtroom, it felt decisive. Julian set his heavy leather briefcase on the table. He took his time. He opened the brass latches with a loud, rhythmic click-clack that echoed off the mahogany walls. He extracted a slim silver laptop and a black hard drive. With the efficiency of a surgeon preparing for an operation, he connected the device to the courtroom's audio-visual system. The large monitors mounted on the walls flickered to life. A blue screen appeared, displaying the Veritas Analytics logo, a stylized eye inside a magnifying glass. Your Honor. Julian addressed the bench, his voice stripping away the last remnants of the family dispute facade. What you are about to see is the result of a 6-month forensic investigation conducted by my firm. We are not just defending Ms. Whitcomb against a frivolous petition. We are presenting evidence of a decade-long conspiracy to defraud, imprison, and defame a United States citizen. Arthur Sterling stood up, his voice trembling slightly. Objection. This is an ambush. We have not had time to review this evidence. This is a competency hearing. Mr. Sterling, Judge Cole replied, his eyes cold and fixed on the screen. You opened the door to your client's history. You claimed Ms. Whitcomb has a history of drug abuse. If this evidence speaks to that claim, I will allow it. Sit down. Sterling sat. He looked like a man trying to make himself small enough to disappear through the floorboards. Exhibit A, Julian announced. Video surveillance footage recovered from the Harrington Estate security server. Dated July 14th, 10 years ago. The screen shifted. The image was grainy at first. A black and white view of a crowded terrace. It was the night of the charity gala. The timestamp in the corner marked the time as 8:45 in the evening. The original footage was deleted from the main server the morning after the incident, Julian explained, narrating with the detachment of a news anchor. However, Mr. Harrington's security company kept a backup on a redundant tape drive, which was archived and subsequently forgotten in a storage facility in New Jersey. Veritas Analytics purchased that security company 3 months ago. We recovered the drive. I watched the screen. I saw my younger self, 19 years old, standing in the corner, looking terrified and awkward in that blue silk dress. I saw the crowd swirling around me. Then, I saw her. Chloe walked into the frame. She was holding 2 glasses. She looked over her shoulder, checking for witnesses. Her back was to the camera, but as she turned, her hand moved over the glass in her left hand. Julian hit a key. The video froze. "Enhance Sector 4, Julian commanded. The AI software built by my team went to work. The pixels sharpened. The blur resolved into clarity. On the screen, magnified 500%, was Chloe's hand. Between her thumb and forefinger, she held a small paper packet. She tilted it over the glass. A stream of white powder cascaded into the orange juice. The courtroom was dead silent. Julian pressed play. Chloe swirled the glass, the powder dissolving instantly. She walked over to me. She handed me the poisoned drink. I took it. "Oh my God," a reporter in the front row whispered. Julian paused the video. He turned to the plaintiff's table. "That is not drug abuse, Your Honor," Julian said. "That is poisoning. That is assault with intent to cause bodily harm. And that," he pointed a long finger at Chloe, "is the woman who did it." Chloe was shaking her head violently. Her face was a mask of panic. "No, that is fake. That is a deep fake. You made that with a computer." "Digital forensics confirm the file has not been altered," Julian shot back. "The metadata matches the creation date of the original tape. We have the chain of custody." "Exhibit B," Julian continued, not giving them a second to breathe. The screen changed. It was now displaying a series of bank statements. These were not the sanitized versions my father showed the IRS. These were the raw transaction logs from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, listed under a shell company called Victoria Ventures. "Mrs. Harrington claimed she paid for her daughter's treatment out of love," Julian said. "But this transfer, dated the night of the incident, tells a different story. A line item was highlighted in red. A wire transfer for $50,000. The recipient was listed as M. Reynolds. We cross-referenced this name," Julian said. "Martha Reynolds was the head nurse on duty at the local hospital the night Laura was admitted. She was the one who administered the toxicology screen. 3 days after this transfer cleared, Nurse Reynolds resigned and paid cash for a condominium in Florida." Julian turned to Victoria. She was staring at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. She looked at Robert, but he refused to meet her eyes. "You bribed a medical professional to falsify a drug test," Julian stated. "You paid $50,000 to frame your stepdaughter as a meth addict so you could ship her off to a holding facility without a legal fight." Judge Cole was no longer sitting back. He was leaning over the bench, his face flushed with anger. He looked at Arthur Sterling. "Counselor, did you know about this?" "I had no idea, Your Honor," Sterling stammered, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "I assumed the medical records were genuine." "Ignorance is not a defense when you are facilitating a felony," Julian said. "But let us move to the motive. Why do this? Why destroy a 19-year-old girl's life? Why now, 10 years later, try to seize her trust fund?" "Exhibit C," Julian said. The screen changed for the final time. It showed a complex spreadsheet. It was a balance sheet, but the numbers were bleeding red. "Harrington Estates is bankrupt," Julian declared, "but it is worse than simple insolvency. This is the employee pension fund ledger for the Harrington Group." I stood up then. I wanted to deliver this part myself. "My father," I said, my voice cutting through the room, "has been raiding the retirement accounts of his own employees for the last 2 years. He has stolen $4 million from the people who cleaned his buildings, the people who fixed his elevators, the people who guarded his lobbies." I picked up the laser pointer from the table and aimed it at the screen. "Here," I said, circling a transaction. $2 million transferred out of the pension fund to cover a margin call on his personal brokerage account. And here, I circled another. $1.5 million transferred to pay off gambling debts at the Sapphire Club in Monte Carlo. I turned to Robert. He was slumped in his chair, his hand clutching his chest, his face the color of old ash. You needed my $3.6 million, I said, walking slowly toward their table, not to save me, but to plug the hole in the pension fund before the federal auditors arrive next month. You were going to use my grandmother's legacy to cover up your theft. I stopped directly in front of him. There was no glass partition between us now, no security guards, just the truth. You told the world I could not live alone, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You told this court I was helpless. You told the press I was a burden. I leaned down, forcing him to look at me. In the last 10 years, while you were stealing from your janitors, I built a company valued at $500 million, I said. I employ 400 people. I have never missed a payroll. I have never stolen a cent. I built something real. I looked at him with absolute contempt. And you? Father, what have you done, other than spend the money your father left you? You are not a businessman. You are a parasite. And today, the host is cutting you off. Liar, Chloe screamed. The sound shattered the tension. Chloe jumped up, her chair clattering backward. She pointed a trembling finger at me. She is lying. That video is fake. I never put anything in her drink. She is a witch. She is doing this to hurt us. Sit down. Ms. Harrington, Judge Cole roared. She is manipulating everyone, Chloe shrieked, her eyes wild. She is the crazy one. Look at her. She is enjoying this. Arthur Sterling grabbed Chloe's arm, trying to pull her down. Shut up, Chloe. For God's sake, shut up. I won't, Chloe yelled, pulling away. It is my money, too. I deserve it. I put up with her for years. Miss Harrington, you have the right to remain silent, Julian Thorne said, his voice booming like a gavel. And I strongly suggest you use it, because you just admitted to a motive on the court record. Chloe froze. She looked around the room. She saw the reporters typing furiously. She saw the judge staring at her with disgust. She saw her mother weeping into her hands. She collapsed back into her chair, sobbing hysterically. Judge Cole picked up his gavel. He did not tap it gently. He slammed it down with a force that made the wood crack. Enough, the judge said. His voice was shaking with suppressed rage. I have heard enough. In 30 years on the bench, I have never seen such a flagrant abuse of the judicial system. He looked at the petition on his desk, the paper that claimed I was incompetent. He ripped it in half. The petition for conservatorship is dismissed with prejudice, Judge Cole declared. Ms. Whitcomb is clearly competent, successful, and the only sane person in this family. He turned his gaze to the plaintiff's table. However, this court is not done with you. He looked at the bailiff. Secure the courtroom. No one leaves. Judge Cole pointed at Robert and Victoria. I am referring this entire matter to the district attorney's office immediately, he announced. Based on the evidence presented today, I am recommending that charges be filed against Robert Harrington and Victoria Harrington for fraud, embezzlement, perjury, and false imprisonment. He looked at Chloe. And against Chloe Harrington for assault and battery, and perjury, and Mr. Sterling, the judge added, glaring at the lawyer. You will be reported to the State Bar Association by the end of the hour. I expect your license will be suspended pending an investigation into your complicity in this fraud. But, Your Honor, Sterling tried to protest. One more word, Counselor, and I will hold you in contempt and have you arrested right now, Judge Cole warned. At that moment, Robert let out a low, gurgling groan. He grabbed his left arm. His eyes rolled back in his head. He slumped forward, his head hitting the table with a dull thud. Robert, Victoria screamed, grabbing him. Oh my God, his heart. Help him. Pandemonium broke out. The bailiff called for a medic. Reporters were standing on benches to get a better view. Victoria was shaking Robert, wailing. I stood still. I did not rush to him. I did not scream. I watched the scene with the clinical detachment of an auditor reviewing a failed investment. Julian leaned in close to me. Is he faking? I looked at the man who had slapped me, the man who had locked me away, the man who had tried to erase my existence to pay his gambling debts. Does it matter? I asked calmly. I turned away from the table where my father lay gasping for air. I picked up my sunglasses and slid them back onto my face. Let the paramedics handle him, I said to Julian. My shift is over. The chaos of the courtroom faded the moment the heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind me. It was like stepping out of a hurricane and into the eye of a storm. Inside, the air had been thick with shouting, the click of cameras, and the frantic wailing of a family watching their empire turn to dust. But out here, in the wide, marble-floored corridor of the Supreme Court, there was only the rhythmic sound of my own heels clicking against the stone. I did not run. I did not look back. I walked with the steady, measured pace of a woman who had nowhere to be but exactly where she was. The press was waiting at the bottom of the steps, a sea of microphones and cameras held back by court security. I could see their mouths moving, shouting questions. Ms. Whitcomb, how do you feel? Is your father really going to prison? What will you do with the company? But behind the glass of the main entrance, their voices were muffled, reduced to insignificant background noise. I had spent 10 years terrified of what people would say about me. Now, I realized that their words were just wind. They could not touch me. Standing near the security checkpoint, leaning against a pillar with her arms crossed, was Evelyn. She was not wearing her janitor's uniform today. She was wearing a cream-colored wool coat and a silk scarf, looking every inch the dignified former judge she was. When she saw me, her face did not break into a wild grin of triumph. Instead, her expression softened into a look of profound, quiet pride. It was the look a mother gives a child who has not just learned to walk, but has learned to fly. I stopped in front of her. For a moment, we just looked at one another. We were two survivors, two women discarded by a system designed to protect men like my father, who had found each other in the wreckage and built a fortress out of the debris. It is done, I said. My voice was steady, but I felt a tremor in my hands, not from fear, but from the adrenaline leaving my body. It is done, Evelyn repeated. She opened her arms, and I stepped into them. I buried my face in her shoulder, smelling the familiar scent of lavender and old books. We held on to each other tightly. It was not a hug of celebration. It was an anchor. For 10 years, she had been my compass. She had been the only person who believed I was worth saving when the rest of the world saw garbage. You were magnificent, she whispered in my ear. I saw the live stream. You did not just beat them, Laura. You dismantled them. I had a good teacher, I whispered back. We pulled apart as the commotion behind us grew louder. The doors to the courtroom burst open. 2 court officers marched out, flanking my father. Robert Harrington had recovered from his heart attack the moment the paramedics mentioned a toxicology screen. Now, he looked truly sick. His hands were cuffed behind his back. His jacket was draped over his wrists to hide the steel. But everyone knew what was happening. He looked old. The arrogance that had fueled him for 60 years had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, frightened man who could not make eye contact with the cameras. Behind him came Victoria. She was not crying anymore. Her face was frozen in a mask of shock. She was being led by a female officer, her expensive handbag clutching awkwardly in her cuffed hands. She looked at me as she passed. There was no hatred in her eyes, only confusion. She still could not understand how the girl she had drugged and silenced had become the architect of her destruction. I watched them being led toward the side exit, toward the waiting police cruisers. I felt nothing, no joy, no sadness, just a clinical observation of cause and effect. They had planted seeds of cruelty, and now they were harvesting the crop. Laura, wait!" The shrill voice cut through the air. I turned. Chloe was running down the hallway. She was not in handcuffs, not yet, but she looked like she was unraveling. Her hair was messy, her eyes red and swollen. She pushed past a security guard, stumbling in her high heels, desperate to reach me before I walked out the door. Julian Thorne stepped in front of me, his large frame blocking her path, but I placed a hand on his arm. "It is okay, Julian," I said. "Let her speak." Chloe stopped 3 feet away from me. She was panting, her chest heaving. She looked at Julian, then at Evelyn, and finally fixed her desperate gaze on me. "Laura," she sobbed, reaching out a hand but pulling it back when she saw my expression. "Laura, please, you have to listen to me. I didn't mean it. I was 16. Mom made me do it. She told me you were sick and that we had to help you. I was just a kid." I stood perfectly still, my hands in the pockets of my coat. "You were 16. Chloe, you knew exactly what you were doing, and you were 26 when you lied to the judge an hour ago." "I was scared," she wailed. "Daddy said we would lose everything, Laura. Please, you can't let them arrest me. I can't go to jail. I am your sister." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "And the money? You are so rich now. You have hundreds of millions. You don't need the house. You don't need the trust. Please, just help me. I have nowhere to go. My credit cards are frozen. I don't know how to do anything." I looked at her. I really looked at her. For years, I had hated her. I had hated her beauty, her cruelty, her easy life. I had spent nights in the basement apartment in Seattle imagining this moment, imagining the look on her face when I crushed her. But now that it was here, I realized something profound. I did not hate her. Hate requires emotional investment. Hate requires you to care about the object of your hatred. Hate is a bond, a twisted tether that keeps you tied to your abuser. I looked at Chloe, and I felt absolutely no connection. She was just a stranger in a bad outfit crying in a hallway. The tether had snapped. I reached into my pocket and took out my sunglasses. I unfolded them slowly. "Chloe," I said, my voice soft and terrifyingly calm, "I do not hate you. Hating you would take too much energy, and frankly, I have better things to do with my time." "What?" she sniffled, confused. So you forgive me?" "No," I said. "Forgiveness implies that what you did matters enough to be forgiven. It implies that I still value your place in my life enough to repair the bridge. I just do not care anymore. You are irrelevant to my future." "But we are family," she screamed, the desperation rising again. "Blood is thicker than water." "That is a misquote," I said. "The full saying is, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The family you choose is stronger than the biology you are born into." I gestured to Evelyn. "This is my family." "You are just a genetic accident I used to know." Chloe stared at me, her mouth agape. "As for the house," I continued, checking my watch, "my lawyers are filing the eviction notice as we speak. Since I own the debt, I own the deed. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. I suggest you use that time to learn a trade. I hear the coffee shop on Main Street is hiring. It is honest work. It might do you some good." 30 days, she gasped. "But where will I go?" "That," I said, sliding my sunglasses onto my face, "is not my problem." I turned my back on her. "Laura," she screamed, "you can't do this. You are a monster." I kept walking. Her screams faded as I pushed through the revolving glass doors and stepped out into the crisp, cold air of New York City. The flashbulbs erupted like a lightning storm, but I did not blink. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom was waiting at the curb, its engine purring silently. My driver, a man I had hired 3 years ago, opened the rear door. Julian and Evelyn followed me. We slid into the leather-scented sanctuary of the car. The heavy door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing out the noise of the press, the screaming sister, and the sirens. "To the airport, Ms. V?" the driver asked. "Yes," I said. "Take us home." The car pulled away. gliding effortlessly into the traffic. I watched the courthouse recede in the rearview mirror. It looked small, the Harrington Empire, the fear, the trauma, it all looked so small in the rear view. I took a deep breath. For the first time in 10 years, my lungs filled with air that felt completely my own. There was no weight on my chest, no looking over my shoulder. I pulled my phone from my pocket. There was a notification waiting for me. It was a render from my architecture team back in Seattle. I opened the file. On the screen was a 3D model of a beautiful, modern complex. It featured sustainable materials, rooftop gardens, and community spaces filled with light. It was not a luxury condo for billionaires. It was a high-quality, subsidized housing project designed for at-risk youth and women escaping domestic violence. The name on the digital sign above the entrance read, "The Sarah Whitcomb Sanctuary." I smiled. My grandmother had left me money, but she had also left me a moral compass. My father had used his power to build cages. I would use mine to build foundations. "Is that the final design?" Evelyn asked, looking over my shoulder. "It is," I said, tapping the approve button on the screen. "Construction starts next month. I want the first wing open by winter." I looked out the window. The skyline of New York was passing by, tall and imposing. I used to look at these buildings and feel insignificant. Now, I looked at them and saw only geometry and physics. I saw things that could be built and things that could be taken apart. I had walked through the fire and I had not burned. I had not let them turn me into a monster. I had not killed them. I had not beaten them physically. And I had not stooped to their level of lies. I had simply used the truth as a mirror and forced them to look at themselves until they crumbled. That was the ultimate victory, to win without dirtying your hands, to walk away not just with the money, but with your soul intact. I leaned back against the headrest and closed my eyes. The car accelerated onto the highway. Moving toward the horizon, I was 30 years old. I was free. And for the first time in my life, the story was entirely mine to write. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It has been a long journey, and I appreciate you walking this path of justice with me. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening from a busy subway in New York, a quiet room in London, or somewhere else entirely? Please drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts on the ending. And if you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Sunday Drama Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need to believe that truth always wins in the end.